Today I want to share with you an old sketchbook of mine and what you should not do when you're learning figure drawing and anatomy. Then we're going to go back to these amazing references that you're seeing on your screen and talk about potentially what I would do if I had to go back. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So basically the main thing that we're going to be talking about here is copying and when copying is good enough and when we should have that in our process. I've done a lot of copies from the most diverse materials out there: courses, videos, books, tutorials, gumroads, a lot of things. And I haven't applied them on my day-to-day, and that's, I think, the big mistake I made throughout the year. So here you can see Scott Eaton examples. You're going to see Michael Hampton, so skeleton studies from Scott Eaton, structure studies from Michael Hampton. And the biggest thing is, I'm not saying that copying is bad. Copying has its place, especially educating our perception and really understanding what good looks like, especially in terms of proportions, volumes, flow, as you're seeing there with gestures from Michael Hampton, what a flowing line looks like, as well as the overall proportions of the human being, and especially the proportions of the head. But definitely we're not going to remember a lot of that if we don't practice from imagination. What we're going to see in part 2 basically is applying and understanding all these studies that we're making to solve problems. So these are methodologies to solve problems. So either it could be working from simple gestures, or the Riley method, as this that we're looking right now, or all the other methodologies for cloths, simulation, and how cloth follows on the form, gesture once again. And this page is interesting, that this is basically a direct copy from all the illustrations on Michael Hampton. And there, as I said before, there is a little bit of value to that, but you lose a lot of that. This is a great exercise, the triangles for balance. So this is something I took for life from those studies, and I use that to teach nowadays. Proportions, we're going to get back to that, but a lot of gesture studies, and you should always do Croquis Cafe and all those websites New Master Academy has on YouTube, to learn gesture, to start getting used to the proportion from the human body. This is Bridgman. There is a great video by Proco on how to study Bridgman. It's great for proportions and it's great for finalizing, but it's very stylized to some extent to really convey what he's trying to convey. So be careful with that. This example is more of focusing on finalizing the drawing. It's from Harold Speed book, Practice and Science of Drawing. So the idea is different. So in this case, I think the copy is great, and I've heard Ian McCaig talk about copies from Andrew Loomis and all of that, to understand how they're using rendering techniques to get to a great drawing result. So definitely doing those copies is a big part. Some other studies from different topics from the human, but that's the only diversion on this sketchbook. So basically more Michael Hampton, a lot from figure drawing, design, and invention, doing copies and copies, doing some application here and there from life modeling, but mostly copy. More Bridgman. Some examples from Ian McCaig's book, Shadowline. We're going to talk a bit about that on the other content. Those are really great for balance. So head proportions, once again. You see that I'm coming back to the same topics I should already know, should already have studied. I know that going through different methodologies is good. So Michael Hampton, Bridgman, Riley method, there are different approaches, and different schools will teach different methodologies. But definitely, what problem am I trying to solve here? Is it aesthetic? Is it structure? Is it memory? Is it just proportions? I don't know. I don't have that question in my mind when I'm doing this. It's purely copying most of the time. So that's the main mistake I would love for you all to avoid. Do your copies for aesthetic purposes and to understand what they are conveying. Muscles, muscle movement, and all of that. But beware of what that looks like. Another example of a study trying to apply what I've learned from Harold Speed with a Bernini sculpture. But then I tend to get back to copying Scott Eaton, whoever that is. So I think that's my big mistake. And that's what I want to discuss, how to avoid and work around in the next part. So looking back, I think the biggest mistake I made was not understanding what question I was asking while doing those studies. The biggest question for me that is very clear to me nowadays is that I was trying to understand how they teach figure drawing instead of trying to learn how to draw the figure myself. So I think going forward, the big question you should ask yourselves is, what do I want out of figure drawing? Do I want to create characters, create a world full of characters? Do I want to tell stories? Do I want to draw from real life? So portraits from family and friends and all of that, and be more of a fine artist as a whole. What do I want? It can be more than one thing, but having those questions and doing the work, even when you're not good, will go a long way into when you get to reference, even if not consciously, your mind is looking for the right answers. So let's jump right in here. For example, references. So everything starts with references. If I want to have a very realistic final art piece, I might have to photograph a lot of stuff so I can have the level of detail of that. So it could either be James Gurney here, it could be Norman Rockwell. We have some examples here from Muddy Colors blog, and all links are going to be in the description for all these artists. I don't remember all the names, but those are great examples. So here we can see in the work of David Palumbo that he wanted a very dynamic shot with a lot of details. So having a photograph on that will also be super helpful. Here, Dan Dos Santos, also a lot of reference on the clothing and all of that. So a lot of the questions that you're asking is how to convey what you want to convey in the illustration you are making. What story are you telling, and how do you emphasize that story? We'll get to that point later on. Even comic artist Adam Hughes here, or even Paulo Rivera here, doing more of a cartoony style, but using the reference on the leg and the angle, even the cloth. Here, the cuts and folds on the cloth as a reference, it creates believability to some things that we might not remember or even understand how they work, and not everything has to be rationalized or can be rationalized in that sense. So basically, that's to say, use a lot of references. So when we get to the part of figure, as I said in my previous video, let's focus on structure. So I don't know proportions of the figure. I don't know how many heads there are in a normal figure, so I'll jump to Andrew Loomis, and really understand basic structure. And now every time I draw a body, I'll try and count how many heads it has, even in dynamic poses, and different angles and different perspectives. So frame perspective 2 will help a lot on that direction of line of action, proportions once again, and how to keep stable. You remember the triangle methodology that I showed on my sketchbook, between both legs and the head sometimes, or even the pelvis, to understand if that there is balance or if the body is going to fall down. So dynamic poses, understanding this kind of early on movement, proportions. And on this last book by Ken Muftik, and I brought here an example from my friend Stefan Kromiek, how to connect shadows in this kind of proportion. We're going to see later on and the final touches, and get more acquainted with that side. But here we're going to start just looking and understanding, doing more life drawings from real life or from references on the internet. How can we use the shadow shapes to connect things? What are the proportions on those shadows? What are the proportions on the overall body? Sometimes you don't need to focus on the head. Just block that in and focus on the torso and understanding visually what is there. So there is a part that is rationalizing. There is a part that is more observation. So I think this is the point where the copy will go a long way, because a lot of the stuff that you need to learn, it's hard to rationalize, and you need to internalize to a lot of practice, both from real life models, from if possible from internet models, references all over the place, as well as those books, and really understand and have a grasp of the overall figure. We're gonna later on start diving deeper into quality of drawing, but now is the time to understand overall structure. Even the face, as I was showing before, there is a book by Loomis himself on heads and hands. Also a great reference to add here if you want to focus a lot on that side of the portraiture. One quick stop here to really emphasize, at this point, keep doing your work. Keep telling stories. Keep creating worlds. It doesn't matter if it's not looking that well. You are developing other sides of storytelling, of thinking what elements of that story will convey what you need to convey. What elements of clothing and accessories will help convey the world that you're trying to build. Looking at references from ancient history, museums, and all of that. We're going to see Evan Melamundsen later on using a lot of his knowledge on armors and all of that to really convey something that is believable. So it doesn't matter if it's not good enough right now, but keep going. It's cycles. You apply on things you want, or even drawing more of a portrait artist. So drawing from real life and going out there and talking to people. Can you pose for me? I need to practice. It's not going to look good now, but I really need to practice. So keep doing that more and more. Some of the best portrait artists I've seen, they had so many people pose for them over the years. So it was great to watch a lot of that happen. So the next step is gesture. So gesture, basically what I would suggest is understanding forces and movement here. Sometimes we go to a live model session, and sometimes we'll have the focus of just connecting shapes and trying to convey a beautiful image, and that's great. Sometimes it's going to be a costume drawing that you're trying to understand other stuff and convey other way. Sometimes it's going to be just practice, even not rationalizing anything, just practice. But sometimes and at this point, it's going to be balance, it's going to be force, as we see in this great book, it's going to be movement. So what can we emphasize when people are getting heavy boxes and putting them on their shoulders? What kind of movement do they do? What kind of posture they have to hold on to the weight? And all of that will help a lot later on to convey your stories. So it's going to be really big. So all of this, directions of movement, how the posture changes when we have movement. We have the easiness of having a lot of footage out there. So movement is something that we can really use. So there are lots of studies there is an artist called Robert Liberace. He has a lot of drawings of movement. He focuses on the quality of the drawing as well, but on conveying the movement. And animators are the biggest in conveying movement and everything else, composition, quality of drawing, and all of that. And one extra example that I mentioned on my sketchbook before, it's Ian McCaig's Shadowline. He has some tutorials inside the book, and one of them is on balancing rocks, understanding that would later on translate to the figure and balancing all of that. So it's a great exercise. He has a lot of other exercises on his drawing workout on Schoolism. So I think that's great to have in mind as well. This is from Jesper Eising. I love this example. It's from one post in Muddy Colors, where he focuses on what he should have learned before or should have done. And one of those things is sketching like crazy. So do sketches of poses, movement, and all of that. And even shapes. I love this course by Viktor Kovalchev on Schoolism as well. So using cross-hatching to find form, to find shape, and really convey what's there. So it's a different approach. It's something that will relate to the rendering later on, but has a lot to do with movement of volumes. So it's a great solution to the questions that we have in our mind. How does movement work? How does posture work? Next step, anatomy. So what the biceps looks like, deltoids. So looking here at Bridgman, or even at Ray Bustos, we can focus on understanding in this more stylized way that we find in Bridgman what those muscles look like, how they connect, especially on a very worked out model, very stylized in a sense, as I said, but beautiful to its point. So it at least in my opinion, it's beautiful aesthetic work as well. And it's interesting to see in ourselves some of the muscles that we're going to be studying. And it doesn't matter if it's Ray Bustos, Bridgman, Steve Houston. We're going to be absorbing a lot of that and looking at ourselves as well. So that when we go back to drawing from life, and here are other examples from Steve Houston himself, from New Masters Academy, if I'm not mistaken, as well as Watts Atelier here. A great Jeffrey Watts, great example as well. More on from Schoolism, if you want to learn. So all those materials are really good to learn the figure and figure drawing, so that when we get back to figure drawing from life or to our worlds and characters that we're building, as well as the illustrations that we're trying to convey, we have a lot of knowledge to put into our drawings. It's going to be a lot of combination of what we know, what we imagine, what we remember, what we look from references, and how all of that is useful to really convey what we're trying to convey. If it's a portrait or drawing, and I usually go back that because it's a no-brainer for what story you're trying to tell or what character you're trying to create. It's easier, the application. On fine art, it's going to be a little different, but definitely there are ways you can keep improving both what you're seeing or how your lines convey the emotions that you're trying to express. We're going to see a lot of examples below from this type of work. And sometimes it's going to be a midway between fine art and illustration. For example, we've seen in imaginative realism a lot of historical illustration and all of that. So a lot of the academic painters from back in the 19th century, they used a lot of models to really help populate their scenes. They used knowledge that they had on anatomy and they learned in the academy and all of that, but together with the references that they had from the models. So that's a big part, next part on art history, to really focus on understanding what people did in the past. Steve Houston talks a lot about that in his book about figure drawing, using a lot of the examples from Rubens and Michelangelo and a lot of those artists from the Renaissance on. So it's great to really go back. And Bernini here, you saw one study of mine in my sketchbook on Bernini. So it's a big topic to go into. I would go into at this point more than as I put in my other video after the portrait design. Because the portrait design, at this point, we have been studying the figure in multiple ways. We have a grasp of what that looks like and how to put all that information in our illustrations, concepts, and fine arts. But now it's the time to get to the next level. So in my opinion, all the examples that we have here on the screen right now, and even like to the side of the screen here, are great examples of how to push a little more from just the basic. So Nicolas Uribe, great example on the use of line for fine arts. Great painters as well, has a channel here on YouTube, Our Painted Lives. Carla Ortiz, so it's what I was saying about the midway between illustration and fine arts. She's one of the biggest examples that come to mind on this kind of use, especially on graphite, but she does oil painting as well. Nathan Fowlkes, I love his book and approach to edges, unifying the shadow shapes, readability, all that we're starting to see in the figure back then. Now it's the time to bring to full force. This one is from Wesley Burt. So practicing a lot of drawing of heads from memory, as well as finalizing some of them from reference as well. I don't know his example in here, what is from memory, what is from imagination, what is from reference, but practicing. So how to use your values at this point and some rendering to really convey aesthetic beauty. I think this is the biggest challenge here, as well as expressions. We haven't talked about expressions. We talked about gesture back then, but now this is T.B. Choi. Great examples on how to use facial expressions to convey emotion. Animation does this really well. There is even one example from Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, a school. I heard that one midterm that they have there is to draw, I think, 300 expressions copying from Disney movies, so that you really understand what changes they are making to each of those expressions. So it's great exercise and will really help move to the next step of conveying motions. We could do the same with the hands as well. Nicolas Uribe has great drawings on hands. You should definitely check that out. Next, I would say, is the application that we've been doing, but also getting to a next level. So character design and illustration and storytelling. Both of them will have different methodologies, different ways of conveying their information. So it could be looking at Evan Melamonson's Domestica course that is great on character creation and understanding what do you want to create with every character, and having those references, as I said before, armor, all of that, and drawing, detailing all the way, and then finalizing with painting and all of that. We have the Silver Way book that was suggested in my video for the 50 books that was missing actually on that video and was suggested in the comments. So it's great on stylization if you want to go one step further. We can see here TB Choi once again, a great example of stylization. I think it's the best example out there. It's from one of her online classes. So how to stylize in different styles of different IPs. So very animated, more like Pixar animation, more anime, more realistic, and here midway, more video game to some extent. So this is great. I can't stress enough how important this is if you want to do character design, to have range and of styles as well. Some people will have great careers not having so much range, but understanding a little bit will go a long way as well. As well as illustration, and I'm going to get to other topics later on, but illustration has its process. We've seen with imaginative realism, and we're seeing here with creative illustration. Loomis has a lot of great examples of final drawings as well. I've heard Ian McCaig saying before that when he needed to really up his skills, he would go to Andrew Loomis to really understand how he was rendering a lot of the stuff, and even copying a lot of those drawings to really get a grasp of how he finalizes his work. So this is great. This is also Gregory Menches. I love his thumbnail sketches. We saw Jesper Eising up here. His thumbnail sketches are also amazing. You can see a lot of them on Muddy Colors, so definitely go check that out. The link's going to be in the description as well. So great work overall. And the next step for me would be what I called previously expertise. So now that we have all this knowledge, we've practiced, we have the tools, we've done character design or illustration or our fine art application, we can dive deeper and have a lot of different references. I encourage you all to have references from the get-go and progressively grow. But I think now we're going to have all the tools needed to break down some of the references that we are using and we admire. So it could be, for example, here TB Choi, as we saw. So the shape language that she's using on her designs, the overall silhouette and how she's pushing for something that looks different. I brought here the books on more the fine art side as well. It's a little bit on fine art and illustration from Elisa, but she pushes a lot as well. Down here, Hugo Richard, great character designer, more realistic style. So how to organize readability on shapes, on colors, flat colors, proportions, design as a whole. So this is really hard to simplify. So having a lot of different references to study. So Hee-chan another great example, using colors to really flow through the figure. We saw the same here with Hugo. On the stylization, more on the animation side of character design, we have Carter Goodrich here for Merida design for Brave. I think that's her mother, if I'm not mistaken. Looks a little bit like her, a little bit like her mother. But great work as well, using shapes and going really far with that. Up here, we have Nico Marley. So it's another way to really push all that we have learned and go the extra mile for animation. On a more stylized side, we have Faraz. In a little bit stylization, a little bit realism from Claire Wendling. So these are all examples, great examples on character design, and a little bit of illustration here and there. But we can also see in fine arts and bring the same to illustration. Craig Mullins, here, one of his drawings. I love the use of cross-hatching to convey form, as well as to organize readability, not detailing the hair so much, but detailing the rest. Here we can see some of the same from Sargent, as well as Harold Speed. So both these drawings will do a little bit of that, focus one area, understand how to convey form with masses and organize readability. And finally, last but not least, Elisa. Once again, a mix of illustration and fine art, how to organize readability, how to organize values. So this is the extra mile for illustration. We saw Carl Ortiz do that really well and organize the readability. There is also the use of posture that will have to really go deeper, as well as the angle of camera. So there is another world to storytelling that I'm not bringing here, that is basically focusing on cinematography, how to convey story through the lens or through the picture plane, and how to organize elements in the scene, in composition, and all of that to really make the scene happen. So that is another big topic that for all of you that want to do illustration, you should also start in parallel understanding more of those concepts. It could be from a framed ink in other books that I have suggested in my 50 books for the self-taught artists. So I think that would be a great segue if you want to really dive deeper into that side as well. So that's it from me. I hope this inspired you to go over my mistakes and not do them yourselves, or if you're doing them yourselves, to go in a different direction. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section so that we can really understand pains and successes from the community and really have a conversation on this topic. So I really hope you enjoyed this content, and I'll definitely see you in another video. Have a great one.